We're joined today by Dr. Moon Chung-in, who is the James Laney Professor Emeritus at Yonsei University. He's also the Vice Chairman of the Asia Pacific Leadership Network for Nuclear Non-Proliferation and Disarmament, and the Editor-in-Chief of Global Asia. He was an advisor to 3 presidents in South Korea, and he's widely recognized for his expertise in inter-Korea relations and East Asian security issues. Dr. Moon, it's an honor to have you. Thank you so much for making the time.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
Well, let's jump right in. There's a lot going on involving the Korean Peninsula, and some of it is quite remote from the Korean Peninsula. We wanted first to ask you about the reports that are coming out recently about North Korean soldiers, perhaps officers in Russia fighting against Ukraine. Have you been able to confirm any of that information? And do you know how many there might be?
Yeah, President Zelensky, studied that episode with the revelation that North Korean soldiers in the battlefield in Kursk and the area, and then later on that the Korean National Intelligence Service came up with some satellite intelligence showing that there's a signs of North Korean soldiers, being trained in Russia, Russian East. And then initially that Secretary Austin was somewhat hesitant to confirm during his attendance at the NATO defense or the G7 defense ministers in the meeting. But finally, American government confirmed that there are some evidences that North Korean soldiers in the Russian territory.
Yeah.
But in South Korea, there's a debate on the nature of North Korean involvement. Okay, for example, our Ministry of National Defense has stated that there are what in Korean word called the pakyeon. Pakyeon means what dispatch of personnel to Russia, but on the other hand, the National Intelligence Service has been saying that there has been pabyong, means what dispatch of troops to Russia. Therefore, when you use the term dispatch of personnel, they could be involved in like Army Corps of Engineering, kinds of so-called supporting staffs and whatever.
Right.
But in the case of dispatch of troops, that means what really dispatch of DPRK soldiers to Russia. Therefore, there is one debate going on, and another debate involves that it is really dispatch of any DPRK personnel or troops, because all those North Koreans are wearing Russian uniforms,
Right.
and fighting under the Russian Republic. Okay, therefore, then for example, when South Korea dispatched the troops to Vietnam, South Korean soldiers wore in a South Korean uniform, right?
Right.
Therefore, then it is like machineries, like Wagner, forces, whatever. But there is another big debate going on, okay, and therefore it's yet to be seen. First, we should figure it out whether those North Korean folks show up in Kursk area or in a Donbas area, whatever. That would be the most important evidence. And second, what would be the mission of their works there? They're active, combat forces or just supporting forces for engineering and other logistic areas. Definitely yet to be seen.
What do you think, Dr. Moon? Do you have any sense? Can you speculate? Do you have any idea of what might be going on?
I don't know. I think we cannot come up with any kinds of conclusive, evidence. Not yet. Okay. Therefore, we should, we can use all kinds of, intelligence, asset to figure it out in what would be the pattern of their involvement. But one important point is this: those guys who are being trained in Russian Far East, in the Vladivostok and Khabarovsk area, whatever. They are wearing Russian uniforms. Okay, therefore they will be under Russian command and control. And then can it be justified as DPRK forces? Okay, therefore it takes in the form of rather mercenaries rather than official dispatch of DPRK forces to Russia.
This is an important point, I think. North Koreans have participated in revolutionary engagements for decades. They were fighting in Angola, for example, in the Angolan Civil War. And my understanding is that in those engagements, they were fighting under a North Korean command, or they were at least in North Korean uniforms. Would this be, if it's true, would this be the first time that North Korean soldiers have fought under a foreign command in foreign
Uh,
uniforms?
For example, during the Vietnam War, it was reported that the North Korean pilots were riding the so-called North Vietnamese in the planes.
Hmm.
In fact, they lost lots of North Vietnamese planes.
Hmm.
Okay, and also when they engaged in the wars in the Middle East, they never revealed the North Korean identity, and particularly they were using Syrian, you know, uh, uh, the Syrian identity. Therefore, in certain cases, yes, DPRK, troops had their own uniforms, their own identity. But in many other cases, they are under disguise of other, and cover up. Therefore, we do not know, what would be the case in Russia.
What would it mean if it's true that the North Koreans are in Russia under Russian command or North Korean command? What would it mean? Would it be significant in terms of battlefield tactics or in terms of overall strategy, or would it be simply politically significant, signaling a change of geopolitical landscape?
But as Putin made it very clear, the North Korean, even if North Korean involvement is true, its impact will be very much, insignificant.
Hmm.
It's more symbolic than the real, because
Right.
and I think there is the linguistic barriers between North Korean soldiers and Russian soldiers. And
Right.
second, the whole weapon system is very, very different, between the two countries.
Right.
And even doctrinal, orientation is very different. Therefore, it will be very difficult for North Korean soldiers to be integrated into Russian military system in the battlefield. Therefore, from that point of view, I think that the significance of DPLK forces getting into our Ukrainian battlefield would be very minimal for me.
Hmm.
Um, so there's also a debate in South Korea as to what the next move would be for South Korean government. And there's also, I guess, debate of whether the South Korean government would send lethal weapons to Ukraine in response. Do you think there's a likelihood that the current South Korean government would sort of escalate a little bit and send lethal weapons to Ukraine? And what would that potentially mean for the tension in Korean Peninsula? Would that escalate tensions in the peninsula?
President Yoon Suk-yeol has shown very assertive behavior, and with regard to all these recent report on North Korean involvement in the war in Ukraine. But in real terms, I think he has very limited options. Okay, even he cannot transfer lethal weapons to Ukraine because of the South Korean legal system,
Hmm.
because our law, prohibits, our government to transfer any lethal weapons to the countries in conflict.
Hmm.
Okay? And therefore, then President Yoon should get the approval from National Assembly. But opposition party has a majority seat in the National Assembly.
Hmm.
Therefore, it will be extremely difficult to get the approval. Okay? Particularly, it is more so because the opposition party in South Korea does not want to be entrapped into the war in Ukraine. Therefore, it won't be easy. Therefore, we have a very limited one,
Hmm.
and particularly if we decide to, dispatch any troops, and he should get the approval from the National Assembly. But that would be totally impossible. Therefore, in
Hmm.
other words, he can show that kind of rhetorical, stance However, in implementing the commitment, he will encounter a lot of challenges.
Hmm. Hmm. What's the general mood in South Korea about the conflict in Ukraine? You mentioned that the National Assembly would not approve the sales of weapons to Ukraine. Are people becoming pessimistic about the possibilities of Ukraine continuing the war at all? Has there been a shift in public opinion about the war in South Korea?
No, I think yesterday there was one opinion poll was conducted. I think Gallup poll. It shows almost 80% opposed. Okay, sending any kinds of lethal weapons to Ukraine. However, humanitarian assistance was 65% and supported the assistance of humanitarian assistance to Ukraine. Therefore, there is no public support of South Korea's deeper involvement in Ukraine.
This is interesting because the narrative that we often hear in Western countries, especially the United States, is that, and in Japan, where I am, is that the war in Ukraine is linked to security issues in East Asia. So that if Russia were to win this war, it would have negative implications for security arrangement in East Asia. But it seems like the South Korean public is not buying that argument, that the two are not related. Is that a fair assessment? And what do you think about it?
That is common sense, because for South Koreans, they do not want to entangle with wine anywhere. Okay. Therefore, in other words, there is the general consensus. Even as for the Taiwan crisis, if there is a crisis over the Taiwan Strait, should South Korea extend the military assistance to Taiwan and the United States and Japan? Almost 65% no. We should take a neutral position. Okay. Because South Korea went through the war. We were victims of the war. Okay. Therefore, they realized how tragic the war could be. Therefore, they do not want to be really entangled with war in other part of the world, unless it is really, endorsed by the United Nations and whatever. If there is a common cause, I think the Korean people will support. Other than that, it will be very difficult. And also, there is a fear that if South Korea is involved in supporting Ukraine, and then Russia began to support North Korea in wholehearted manner, then there will be a negative boomerang effect on the Korean Peninsula. That is why a great number of South Koreans, and particularly opposition party, have been urging that we should be very prudent in dealing with that issue. Therefore, it is an existential issue for us. It's not simply, because of the very reason that the war in Ukraine can create a spillover effect on the Korean Peninsula. General public has become much more cautious in dealing with that issue.
This is an interesting point you raise, and I'd like to ask a follow-up question, which may be difficult to answer. You mentioned entanglement, and I'm wondering if the South Korean security situation will allow South Korea to avoid entanglement via the Washington route. In other words, I understand what you're saying, that it's common sense to separate the war in Ukraine from the situation on the Korean Peninsula, but there are still American troops in South Korea, and if something were to happen around Taiwan, involving Japan, involving North Korea, then the Americans could very easily become involved, and that would involve South Korea by proxy. Are South Koreans worried about that, or they think that there's a way to compartmentalize what's going on despite the presence of the United States in South Korea?
All human beings are egoistic. Therefore, yes, we want American security assistance, but only for the Korean Peninsula. If the raison d'etre of American troops in South Korea is to protect South Korea from North Korean military threat. Therefore, that is the way we perceive the value of American forces in South Korea. But Americans want South Korea to be part of American forces,
Right.
okay, in fighting for the whole liberal causes and whatever, okay, universal values and whatever. But that is not the case. Of course, the Yonsei government has been taken side with American in a position, okay, in the name of a value alliance, okay. But that is not very much welcomed. And approval rate of President Yonsei is just about 20%.
Interesting.
That is why there is a huge gap, between President Yoon's stance and public stance.
Interesting.
I want to talk a little bit about China, I guess. How is Beijing perceiving all this? Is Russia, North Korea getting closer? Does that mean Beijing is losing its influence over North Korea?
Yes, China doesn't want to see the revival of old Cold War structure on the Korean Peninsula in Northeast Asia. And China doesn't want to be treated like a rogue state, such as North Korea and Russia. Therefore, China does not want to be part of it. And China does not want any kinds of tension rising in this part of the world. Okay. Therefore, China wanted to get away. And China wanted to improve relations with China after November election. And then China got to show to be in a very good behavior. That is why North Korea doesn't trust China. That's why North Korea made the full betting on Russia. Okay, and Russia and North Korea in the same boat. Okay, therefore there is a huge difference. If that being the case, then it is natural for China to have very limited influence over North Korea.
There was an exercise a couple of days ago involving, I believe, American forces and self-defense forces in Japan, simulating an evacuation of outlying Japanese islands in the event of something that happened around Taiwan, invasion or encirclement. If something like that were to happen, whatever it would be, if there was some sort of action that involved Taiwan, you mentioned before that the South Korean public would like to remain separate from that issue. I understand that position very well. Would that be possible, though, considering the shipping routes, the sea lanes around Taiwan? Is there any contingency plan in South Korea for a Taiwan emergency? Is there any plan B?
No, as even President Yoon Suk-yeol himself made it very clear. In the case of Taiwan Strait crisis, we cannot commit our military, support.
Right.
The reason is very simple. We have a standing threat coming from North Korea.
Right.
Therefore, if there is a crisis of the Taiwan Strait, then there is a greater likelihood that the North Korea may try to take advantage of it.
Right.
Okay? Therefore, in the case of South Korea, then we should watch ourselves over North Korean military move.
Right.
Therefore, and if there is any kind of power vacuum in South Korea, but in the case of the United States, it's very likely that U.S. may mobilize 7th Air Force in South Korea, even some part of Second Infantry Division in South Korea to fight for any contingency over the Taiwan Strait, even South China Sea. Then there is some kind of power vacuum in South Korea. That being the case, then South Korea should stay. South Korean forces should stay in South Korea to defend itself. Therefore, it will not be that easy for South Korea to be, mobilized to support any kinds of military conflict in the Taiwan Strait and South China Sea.
Militarily, certainly, I think that's true. In terms of shipping, commercial shipping that goes through the South China Sea, there would be an impact on that. I suppose.
We all know that, but China has been assuring that there will be no interruption of sea lanes of communication very clearly, because about territory issues, island issues, yes, we are assertive, but we are trading state. China has been made it very clear. Okay, China is the #1 trading state in the world. How the hell trading state would, interrupt the sea lanes of communication.
Mm.
Therefore, there is an argument, and also our government has to believe in it.
Right.
Okay? There is, however, but in a broad terms, our government has been cooperating with Japan, Australia, the U.S. For the joint naval exercise in the Western Pacific,
Mm.
and also South China Sea too. But we're doing it. But when time comes, it will be very difficult for South Korea to commit itself partly because threat from North Korea and partly because of threat from China.
Right.
South Korea is in the firing range of a Dongfeng
Right.
and the ballistic missiles. Okay? Therefore, South Korea will be the most front line of the new military confrontation in this theater.
Mm.
Therefore, South Korean defense planners, even people, they got to be concerned about that kind of geopolitical setting.
Mm.
I also want to talk a little bit about the concept of Asian NATO, and I believe the newly elected Prime Minister in Japan, Ishiba Shigeru, has been proposing this concept of an Asian version of NATO. Uh, you've also, Professor Moon, you mentioned in your Global Asia piece that if Trump is elected in November, there could be this movement among progressives in South Korea to push for a renewed or new security architecture in East Asia. Are we getting closer to this sort of new architecture, or new security architecture in Asia? And is Asian NATO a viable sort of concept?
But the whole problem is that what is meant by Asian NATO?
Mm.
Is the
Mm.
Asianization of NATO, meaning extension of NATO in this part of the world?
Mm.
Or is Asian NATO, or does it mean the resurrection of the NATO, Northeast Asian Treaty, organization, which was proposed by the Secretary John Foster Dulles in 1954?
Mm.
Or does it mean the conjugation of the NATO, CITO, ANGUS?
Right.
There is no clear definition of Asian version of NATO. Okay. But if you talk with the NATO guys in Europe, they talk about extension of NATO's functions in this part of the world and close military cooperation with Asian countries.
Mm.
That is their version of a so-called Asian version of NATO. Okay. But I think for Japanese, like Ishiba Shigeru and others may think about the resurrection of old NATO proposal, Northeast Asian Treaty Organization.
Mm.
But that was proposed by John Foster Dulles in 1954. But at the time, that was rejected by Japanese
Mm.
because the peace constitution just was working in. If that being the case, then there will be, the dismantlement of peace constitution. Therefore, Japanese didn't want it. And at the time, also South Korean President Lee Seung-man didn't want it.
Mm.
Because that being the case, and South Korea should enter alliance with Japan.
Mm.
And he didn't want it. Okay?
Mm.
Only Republic of China, Taiwan wanted it. Okay. But since Japan and South Korea opposed it, John Foster Dulles dropped that idea. Okay. And then CITO, how many ASEAN countries would join that kinds of effort?
Right. Right.
Very little. The Philippines is the only country.
Right.
Okay. And also ANGUS members, Australia, New Zealand, okay, even they have a Quad and AUKUS and others in the setting. Therefore, when they talk about Asian version of NATO, whatever, first they should define what is meant by that.
Interesting.
And they should clarify the scope of military cooperation. But without which we cannot have any meaningful discussion.
When people talk about an Asian NATO here in Japan, it's just as you say, the Southeast Asian nations will probably not be a part of it. But the first country that comes to most people's minds is South Korea. When you think of an Asian NATO, that the first partner would be South Korea. That would have been a very different story just a few years ago when the tensions were much higher between South Korea and Japan. things are much better now, I think. Will that last? Is that a
I
structural
don't think
thing?
so.
No.
The general public sentiment in South Korea is very different from the President Yoon Suk-yeol and his government. Very different. Okay, and therefore, if we enter any kinds of alliance with Japan, then means what? Japan should amend its constitution.
Right.
Okay, therefore going beyond the comprehensive defense, defensive security idea. Okay, but very few public in South Korea would support that idea. Okay? South Koreans strongly support peace constitution in Japan. Any change of status quo in Japanese legal status will not be welcomed in South Korea. Therefore, it is only President Yoon Suk-yeol and as in a pocket of hardline pro-American conservative, they support that idea. Okay, but the majority of South Koreans would have different ideas. Yes, we should maintain very close security cooperation with Japan, but not alliance. Alliance with the US, all right, but not Japan, because of these constitutional issues involved.
So if one defines an Asian NATO as an Asian version, not an Asian extension of NATO, an Asianification of NATO, but as an arrangement that's based here in South and Northeast Asia, it would seem to be a non-starter because the Japan-South Korea relationship would be the bedrock of that, and without that, nothing would happen.
That happened in 1954.
You're back
but
to
then going back to Ganges in the question, therefore, when you talk about Northeast Asian security architecture, now Asian version of NATO is one thing. Another version is the so-called multilateral security cooperation regime in Northeast Asia. You can think about the six-party talk, and if we can institutionalize six-party talk in more, constructive, in a more constructive way, such as Organization for Security Cooperation in Europe type of things. Therefore, then there could be another type of security architecture. Then here we have two contending paradigms. One paradigm is called the collective defense system based on alliance, which assumes common enemies and common threat. That is what US is pursuing right now. But on the other hand, we have a collective security system idea, which is anchored in United Nations Charter. That is which is based on the concept of common security, comprehensive security, and cooperative security. There's no concept of common enemies and common threat. We are all members of one single security community. And therefore, we have two contending paradigms. Now, China is proposing that idea, the collective security system idea and multilateral security cooperation in a regime. But on the other hand, the US has been the United States has been championing collective defense system. And Indo-Pacific strategy, in fact, based on this concept of extended collective defense system. Therefore, how to overcome the difference between the two will be a major task for deliberating on the new security architecture in Northeast Asia.
I want to move a little bit to the U.S. presidential election, which is in less than 2 weeks. How do you think the outcome would influence conflict in Ukraine or the tensions in the Korean Peninsula? Would it make a lot of difference if Trump gets reelected?
If Trump gets elected, there will be a big change in Europe. As Trump promised, the war in Ukraine could come to an early ending. Trump knows how to do it. And Zelensky knows it too. But the conflict in the Middle East will continue. But American commitment to Europe will be under waning. But in Asia, no difference. Regardless of who wins the presidential election, Harris, Trump will continue to bipartisan platform, particularly focusing on China. Therefore, in European theater, there will be major change between Harris and Trump. But in Asia, there is a common ground, bipartisan way of understanding. That is what Chinese right and American effort to encircle and contain Chinese right. Therefore, in Asia, and there will be a commonality between the two.
Would policy towards North Korea be a little different?
That's a tricky part, okay? And from our common sense understanding, and we can argue that Trump will be much more, accommodating, whereas Harris will continue the confrontational policy on North Korea. But again, even if Trump comes up with a more accommodating policy on North Korea, I'm not sure whether Kim Jong-un will, accept that accommodating proposal. Because Kim Jong-un's, dissatisfaction with Trump seems to be very high. And also the reason why, he's making full betting on Russia is partly because of his dissatisfaction with the United States. In fact, now he's making full shift from his grandfather and father's policy on the U.S. Because at the time, Kim Il-sung, Kim Jong-un, Kim Il-sung, Kim Jong-il, their primary foreign policy goal is to normalize ties with the United States. Now Kim Jong-un is saying that forget about it. Okay, we are just abandoning the United States. We discovered a new continent called Russia. We are making all in Russia. But under that setting, I don't know to what extent Kim Jong-un can accommodate Trump's proposal to have a dialogue, unless Trump comes up with very concrete incentives. But most important thing is here. Even if President Trump wanted to do something good for North Korea, Kim Jong-un has learned that he can be, obstructed by the bureaucrats, congressional leaders. There is a so-called structural uncertainty in the United States. That is why, I really doubt whether Kim Jong-un will welcome Trump's proposal. That is why whether it's Harris or Trump, whoever gets elected, even if America comes up with much more accommodating and engaging policy on North Korea, there is no guarantee that Kim Jong-un will bite it.
There seems to be some deep connection to the two things that you're talking about here, Dr. Moon. On the one hand, you're talking about Kim Jong-un's perhaps different approach to the United States in terms of Trump and he's reversing the policy of his grandfather and his father. I think that's definitely true. In terms of Russia and Ukraine, you'd mentioned that there would be a big change in Europe under a second Trump presidency and no change in Northeast Asia. It would seem, though, that if the United States were to lose, they're not directly involved in Ukraine, but if Russia were to win the war in Ukraine, if the United States were to stop signaling support, withdraw its material and financial support, it would seem that would confirm Kim Jong-un's policy shift in Asia to pivot towards Russia and give up on the United States. In other words, things could change in Asia given a second Trump presidency. It seems that a defeat for the West in Ukraine could accelerate big changes coming out of North Korea and Russia in the East. But do you still think those two things are probably not completely related?
Yes, there could be such a kind of possibility too. But because Trump can get very closer to Putin, And now Putin is the only person who can influence Kim Jong-un, not
right.
Xi Jinping. Okay. Therefore, if Trump works with Putin to persuade Kim Jong-un come back to dialogue and have talks with the United States, that could be a different story. Okay. But the problem is this, even though Trump argues that he's very close to Trump, can he do that with Putin? I think American politics will matter.
So Putin has made himself the key man in Asia, in a sense. Then he's the gateway to Kim
But
Jong-un.
on the Korean Peninsula issue, because now Putin has all the so-called secrets, all the secret keys. Okay, because North Korea wants ICBM re-entry technology. North Korea wants nuclear submarine technology. North Korea wants hyper supersonic missile technology. North Korea wants military secrets, military satellite technology. Okay, and all these technologies. Okay, and who has all those technologies? Russia. Okay. That is why I think the Kim Jong-un is making bet on this sending of troops or the personnel to Russia. Therefore, North Korea is counting on it, but I would argue that Kim Jong-un is most likely treated by Russia too. And I doubt that the Russia would share such a critical military technology with North Korea.
Interesting. Dr. Moon, I know you're a very busy man. Sir Kenji, do you have any final questions for Dr. Moon?
Just one last question, I guess. So given that U.S. policy toward North Korea would not really change, whichever either Harris or Trump becomes the president, do you think that nuclear North Korea is sort of the norm that we have to accept? Is that the new sort of reality that the international community has to sort of accept?
No, we should make a distinction between recognition and awareness. We can never recognize North Korea as a nuclear weapon state. Okay, then bargaining term will be completely different. But we got to realize or aware that North Korea has nuclear weapons. It's a huge difference. Okay, and we should restart our approach with North Korea with that kind of understanding. Even though we can recognize North Korea as a nuclear weapon state, okay, because NPT, okay, does not allow North Korea to be a nuclear weapon state. We are all members of NPT. Therefore, we cannot accept or recognize North Korea as a nuclear weapon state. However, we should realize that North Korea has a nuclear weapons.
Right.
And that should be starting point. Then that being the case, this Hippocratic words saying that, denuclearization first. Without denuclearization, there is no relaxation of sanctions and even no meaningful dialogue and whatever. And I think that's a really stupid and extremely hypocritical words. Okay. And if that being the case, then we should change our goal from the denuclearization or CVID, complete verifiable and irreversible denuclearization, to more practical goals, such as what? Halting, stopping, okay, and rolling back. And then incremental long-term dismantlement. Okay. This proposal has been made by the Dr. Siegfried Hacker. Okay. He's a renowned nuclear expert who have been to Yongbyon nuclear facility 6 times. Okay, and American government should have adopted his proposal a long time ago, but they are pounding on CVID. Okay, that's a very important one. That is why we need to understand is this. Therefore, lower expectation and try to restore cognitive empathy on North Korea. if not the emotional empathy, but we got to have a cognitive empathy on North Korea. We should understand North Korea as it is, not as we wish to understand. That is, what Dr. William Perry has been emphasizing. Okay, and then third, we got to be very realistic. Okay, and flexible. For example, why Trump failed? Why North Korea is so angry? Okay, in April 2018, North Korea voluntarily put the moratorium on nuclear missile test. And North Korea didn't undertake any nuclear missiles test from April 2018 up until 2020. But meanwhile, instead of rewarding North Korea, the Trump administration imposed 41 sanction measures on North Korea. Therefore, North Korea should have had very bitter feeling of betrayal. Okay? Because sanctions are a tool to change in North Korean behavior. Then we should, if it is a tool, then we should use the tool in more flexible manner. Of course, I understand American situation. All sanctions are codified. It's legally binding. Therefore, unless you change law, you cannot get away from or get by those in the legal code. But America should come up with some measures how to loosen or relax those rigidity and use them as a bargaining leverage on North Korea. But the United States never did do that one. Therefore, my advice is this, be realistic, be practical, okay? And be more intersubjective, okay? And be more flexible. That is what I wanted to really propose to, advise some American friends.
Dr. Moon, I've learned so much from you in the past 40 minutes. I wish we could keep talking for 4 hours. I have just one last question. It's late at night
Please go ahead.
in Asia. I wanted to ask about the rise of BRICS, the recent BRICS meeting. Russia is the chair this year, and there was a recent meeting of BRICS. Does that change things substantially, the security architecture in Northeast Asia, or is that mainly an economic phenomenon? What do you take on BRICS and how it affects security in Northeast Asia?
I think BRICS is economic phenomenon. It is a kind of counterpart of G7, okay? And the old global South. Okay, and I really don't think the BRICS has reached any threshold of security cooperation among themselves. Okay, because China has a Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and many of those BRICS members, overlap with the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Therefore, I really don't think the BRICS would have any kinds of role for security cooperation. Therefore, you can think about like APEC. APEC has become platform not only for economic issues but also for some security agenda too. Therefore, on the occasion of BRICS summit, the leaders can meet and talk about the security issues. But I really don't think that would involve any formal cooperation, particularly in Northeast Asia. I doubt. That's a totally different issue. Okay.
Thank you so much, Professor Moon Chung-in, the Professor Emeritus at Yonsei University, the Editor-in-Chief at Global Asia, and a font of wisdom about security issues in Asia and around the world. Thank you so much for your time. It's been an honor to speak to you, sir.
Okay, my pleasure. Bye-bye.
Thank you.